Shocking murder in Whitechapel. 6 women mutilated.
Come listen to a dreadful tale I'm telling. In Whitechapel 6 murders have been done. With horror many hearts they now are swelling. Those fearful deeds that now to light have come. 6 months ago a woman was found lying in death's cold arms. How dreadful to relate. What agony they suffered here when dying. They were all nearly found in the same state. It is a trait of human nature that whenever we are confronted with horrible events or happenings, we tend to use humour as a coping mechanism. The Jack the Ripper murders, as horrible and gruesome as they were no exception to this trait, and as the murders increased in both their number and ferocity, they found their way into the popular culture of the age. At the height of the murders, ballads, hawked by itinerant traders, were on sale around the streets of Spitalfields and Whitechapel, often at the very scenes of the crimes themselves, where the curious crowds that had gathered to discuss the murders guaranteed a steady stream of eager customers. But these ballads were not unique to the Jack the Ripper crimes. Street ballads had been around for a long, long time, and they were extremely popular. Any major event, tragedy, dastardly robbery, foul murder, or execution was likely to spawn a proliferation of ditties giving graphic accounts and details of what had happened, and people couldn't get enough of them. However, these ballads didn't just revel in sensationalism. They would also celebrate mundane scenes from everyday life, such as shaking hands, enjoying a slap-up meal, or even medical issues. You name it, you could probably find it in a Balladeers portfolio. One popular ballad from the early 1870s, for example, was entitled "Are You Vaccinated?" and had been written in response to compulsory vaccinations and revaccinations that had been introduced as a result of a major smallpox epidemic. It had the catchy chorus, "Go where you will by day and night, it's the truth what I have stated. The boys they shout and hollow out, 'Oh, are you vaccinated?'" And one of the verses observed, "They'll vaccinate the snobs, you know, oh won't that be a sight? They'll vaccinate Johnny of Lawn upon his wedding night." As popular as these everyday life ditties were, it was the ballads that dealt with murders that were the chart toppers on the streets of Victorian Britain, and the more gruesome the crime, the greater the number of ditties about it that would appear. So street ballads about horrible murders were a well-established form of popular entertainment by the 1880s, and it was inevitable that, as the public interest in the Whitechapel murders gathered momentum, so the crimes themselves attracted the attention of the Balladeers. It is difficult to establish exactly when ditties about the Whitechapel murders began to appear, but they were certainly in evidence in the aftermath of the murder of Annie Chapman, which took place in Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, on the 8th of September 1888. On the 20th of September, a syndicated report appeared in several newspapers in which the reporter informed his readers that, "Anxious to satisfy myself as to what manner of people the dwellers in Hanbury Street are, I have carefully inspected not only the street itself, but the entire neighbourhood." Not 12 hours after the discovery in Hanbury Street, a waxwork exhibition was on the spot with a ghastly travesty of the whole crime. Not 6 hours after the murder, men were hawking comic songs, not the ordinary street ballad, but comic songs, whereof the outrageous refrain bore a jesting allusion to the unspeakable details of the crime. One of the points that was frequently made in the newspapers in the aftermaths of the later Whitechapel murders was that the mood in the streets was almost carnival-like, as people began flocking to the scenes of each of the atrocities in order to see and experience them first-hand. An array of food sellers and souvenir sellers were on hand to cater to these sightseers, whilst those whose properties overlooked the crime scenes were even recorded as having let out their windows in order to allow the visitors to gaze down on the spots where the killings had occurred. Prevalent amongst the street traders were the ballad sellers, who did a roaring trade as excitement over the crimes reached fever pitch. Sadly, or probably thankfully, the actual words of the majority of those ballads have long since been lost to us. But the newspapers were both appalled and fascinated by the offerings of the street balladeers, and so several articles did record the words of some of their compositions. The St. James's Gazette on Saturday the 8th of December in an article about what it termed Ballads of the Slums, reported that in the past few days 3 new ballads have been published having reference to the murder and mutilation of Mary Jane Kelly. They are replete, the article continued, with a grim and ghastly humour, absolutely appalling in its callousness. The writer then went on to provide an example of the opening verse of one of these ghastly ballads. Now ladies all beware, or you'll get caught in a snare. They seem to say the devil's running loose. With a big knife in his hand, he trots about the land, and with all the ladies means to play the deuce. The article then went on to opine that this poet is mild when compared with the horribly insensitive genius who could evolve the refrain to a song descriptive of the champion ripper of all. This sheet has an immense sale, and its popularity is apparently on the increase, but it is much too unpleasant to quote. The Sheffield Evening Telegraph, on Tuesday the 11th of December, took issue with the way that people were finding humour in the murders, and also set down the lyrics of a ballad that was on sale in the East End at the time. The dweller in Whitechapel has been hardened by long familiarity with the most revolting aspects of life. Poverty is his constant attendant, and in his struggles to ward off its clutches, he becomes blinded to the moral horror of his surroundings. Out of the slums where Jack the Ripper has plied his horrible task, it is, we fear, only too true. To what, for instance, but a wholesale deadening of the moral sense are we to attribute the outburst of ghastly humour with which the street ballads of Whitechapel have lately been flooded? Of many of these unique efforts, the Whitechapel murderer is the hero. His awful deeds are described with doggerel callousness that makes sensitive people shudder, and plenty of slangy comicality is infused into these ballads of the proletariat. The man who can find matter for fun in the murder and mutilation of Mary Jane Kelly will extract laughter from anything, and what are we to say of the taste of the poetaster who can choose as a rollicking refrain to his gruesome ditty the champion ripper of all? Here is a sample of the precious stuff, miscalled poetry, which finds wide and ready sale on the streets of Whitechapel. Now at night when you're undressed and about to go to rest, just see that he ain't underneath the bed. If he is, you mustn't shout, but politely drag him out, and with your poker tap him on the head. So look out, Jack the Ripper, we're on your blooming track. There's a pretty piece of rope for you in store. We'll give you beans, old bogey, then good old Ripper Jack. You'll never go out killing any more. As you can see from the aforequoted articles, the Victorian press, or at least sections of it, adopted an attitude of moral superiority towards the literary and musical tastes of the ordinary people of Whitechapel, and columnists were extremely scathing of the unsavoury offerings of the Balladeers. Mind you, it is worth pointing out that there is an element of the pot calling the kettle black here, since many of those same newspapers were more than happy to report on every gruesome and gory detail of the murders in terms that would have put many of the Balladeers to shame. And it wasn't just comic songs and street ballads that were criticised. Some of the other merchandise that was being sold on the streets also drew censure. On Tuesday the 8th of January 1889, the Western Daily Mercury complained that Jack the Ripper is being glorified in the East End. Street hawkers are selling a toy which they affectionately allude to as Old Jack, and confectioners sell him in sugar, red-coated sugar. Is it not shameful to perpetuate the memory of a ruffian in this fashion, to identify him in childish minds with Santa Claus and Father Christmas? It was sufficient to have him guyed on the 5th of November. It is too much that his counterfeit presentment should be obtruded on the little folk passing through our streets, and that he should be cunningly manufactured out of anything half so nice as sugar. The Dundee Telegraph of the same day was equally scathing of the deplorable practice. Confectioners are surely at their wits' ends for new devices when they make knives of sugar and call them Jack the Rippers. The indecency and coarse obliquity of this method of pushing trade amongst children can hardly be too strongly condemned. In its roundup of the shows in the London shops, the Pall Mall Gazette on Tuesday the 15th of January featured the last parlour game invented, which had, so the article stated, the familiar but sinister subject of Jack the Ripper for its central figure. The mysterious object of the policeman's vigilance and the newspaperman's imagination has to escape through a series of squares past 12 constables and 12 reporters. Should he arrive at a specified place without getting a policeman one side of him and a reporter the other, he is not taken. This game will hardly commend itself to the heads of families, the article concluded. It is in fact one of those grim jokes of the gutter by which the merchant of the pavement earns an honest penny. Later that year, Myra's Journal of Dress and Fashion carried an advert for the Great Surprise Watch, which was on sale at the noted house of M.J. Haynes & Co. of Peckham, South London. On showing it to your friends, the advert explained, you ask them what it is worth and so on, and just as they are about to take hold of it, you press a secret spring, which liberates a noted character, namely Jack the Ripper, to the horror and great astonishment of all beholders. Price 1 shilling and threepence each, 3 for 3 shillings and sixpence. Sadly, history does not record how many of these tasteful timepieces Mr. Haynes actually managed to sell. As far as articles about the Jack the Ripper Balladeers were concerned, however, the award for the best scoop must go to the Inverness Courier, which on Friday the 15th of February published an article in which the author explained how he had actually encountered a balladeer and had been able to conduct a little on-the-spot research about his wares. He began with an introduction to the ballad seller himself. In his hand he carried a voluminous sheaf of the most gruesome, blood-curdling literature perhaps that ever was printed. To our horror, we noticed that on the brown wrapper sheet in which his bundle of ballads, when not exposed for sale, was tied up, there was printed for outside title in large capitals, Jack the Ripper Ballads. "Shall I sing you one of them, sir?" he asked, and already so far committed, we could only reply as cheerily as we could, "Oh, by all means, strike up." It was then that, first clearing his throat by a preliminary cough or two, and putting his hand to his necktie to feel, we suppose, that it wasn't too tight, he sang the following ballad. "The demon Jack the Ripper has begun his work once more. His hate for women is bitter, he delights in human gore. The last victim, Mary Kelly, but 26 year of age, has been served much worse by London's curse. You will say I will engage. The demon Jack the Ripper is at work once more. In Spitalfields Mary Kelly he killed and left her in her gore. In the room where she was living her naked body was found. The Ripper no clue was giving to those who lived around. Her body was cut in pieces and portions taken away. Her flesh 'tis shown stripped from her bones. A terrible sight she lay. Poor girl, she was a native of Limerick, we are told, but by poverty and degradation her young days had been sold. In Cardiff and in Carmarthen she passed many of her early years. She fell into shame when to London she came, and caused many unhappy tears. The alarm so very quickly spreading around the fear-stricken place, thousands the news was leading to look upon her face. But those who saw her body looked on with bated breath. They can see her yet and will ne'er forget poor Mary Jane Kelly's death. Where's the noted bloodhounds that such wonders were to do? That Jack the Ripper is not found, it must seem strange to you. The authorities in London must adopt some more secret plan, without bloodhounds to hunt him down, for he must be Satan and not a man. When we had sufficiently complimented him on his voice and style as an effective ballad singer, he asked if we knew Jim Cromer. We had to confess, somewhat shamefacedly, that we did not know Jim Cromer, that we had not the honour and happiness of Jim Cromer's acquaintance. Who was he? "Oh, Jim Cromer is the head of us all," he went on with great enthusiasm. "The best ballad singer out, our champion," and with a look that was meant to be overwhelming. "He makes Ballads himself? Well, we could do nothing less than acknowledge that the said Jim Cromer, as champion ballad singer and capable of making ballads himself, must be a distinguished genius indeed, an admission on our part which was evidently most gratifying to our collocutor, whose admiration of Jim Cromer was manifestly unbounded. "I have here one of Jim Cromer's ballads. Shall I sing it for you, sir?" "I should like to hear it very much," we replied. "Go ahead." And with a long-drawn preliminary inspiration and another touch of his cravat, he sang the following. "The terrible story that I have to tell causes a shudder as on it we dwell. This murderous history has spread through the world, of all these poor women to eternity hurled. The murderer escaping makes London feel they can't tell a moment other lives he may steal. Women to leave home are almost afraid, in case an attempt on their lives should be made. Where are the great men of our modern times who failed to discover these cowardly crimes? Women are slaughtered, not a cry or a sound, till in some hole or corner their bodies are found. 5 millions of people cannot rest in their bed. The murderer's knife seems to anger their head. This demon is hiding in a mysterious way. Pray heaven the villain is taken today. The world has ne'er known such cruelty before, not even abroad on some savage shore. Though for a time this monster may flee, burnt at the stake this fiend ought to be. Think of the poor soul found in Mitre Square, the rivers of blood surrounding her there. Think of the cruel mutilations they found. What a scene it would be for those standing around. The crimes so secret, so quickly are done, no help for the victims is likely to come. In the East End of London that spreads far and wide, little notice was taken if murder was cried. The Berners Street victim was done just the same. Whitechapel people were crying out shame. It shows that policemen in London today can't help a murderer from getting away. They are talking of bloodhounds. It's too late, we say. All trace of the murderer has long passed away. If good men can't do it, I think you'll allow, no dog in the kingdom can hunt him down now. Great is the terror these murders will cause, done in defiance of all human laws. As the winter comes on with darkness and gloom, we hope no one else will meet this sad doom. The villain who these deeds have done, to denounce him is the duty of every one. Until before justice convicted he'll stand. His life's a disgrace to a Christian land. The article ended with the author conceding that, for all their tasteless vulgarity, the Jack the Ripper ballads did have at least one saving grace. The reader will not fail to notice that in these ballads, with all their faults of versification and grammar, there is an honest detestation of the crimes on which they are founded, and a hearty desire for the capture and adequate punishment of the criminal. And with that, his scene of the rhyme report concluded, leaving this particular balladeer to shuffle off and inflict his talent on other residents of other towns. As you can see from the examples of the street ballads recited in this video, they were, for the most part, pretty tasteless, and what they lacked in eloquence they certainly made up for with vulgarity. Their rhythm and flow were at times strained to the point of being non-existent, and they could not by any stretch of the imagination be classed as great poetry, or in many cases as poetry at all. But their popularity cannot be denied, and, as easy as it is for us to mock them as we grimace at some of their tortuous attempts at rhyming or wince at the tastelessness of their graphic imagery, the fact remains that they were probably as close to literature as many of the poor of Victorian Britain ever got. So, in a way, they could be said to have served a useful purpose. And it could be argued that the Jack the Ripper ballads have not been consigned to the dim, distant and primitive past. Indeed, if the truth be told, they are still with us today. Musical retellings of the story of the murders are regularly staged by amdram groups and professional troupes alike, whilst Morrissey, Screaming Lord Sutch, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, LL Cool J, Motorhead, Tyrant's Reign, My Chemical Romance, The Fuzztones and AFI have all released songs about Jack the Ripper, and the lyrics of some of them would make even Jim Cromer proud. So perhaps we shouldn't be too judgmental of their 19th century predecessors, for when it comes to popular culture, Jack the Ripper is as ubiquitous now as he was back then.